Hey Daniel, welcome to the show, man. I'm really excited for a conversation today, and I think it's going to be a good one. Everybody tuning in, I have with me a friend, sort of mentor, and all around really awesome guy, Daniel Ushida. Daniel is Brazilian by nationality and is currently working as a corporate growth trainer with Growth Tribe, based in the Netherlands. Daniel and I go back a couple of years. He actually was sort of the one who gave me, who connected a lot of dots for me in terms of growth strategy, growth processes, and I think we've got a really interesting conversation lined up today. So without further ado, let you introduce yourself, Daniel.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hi, Marcus. Very nice to be here. Thank you for the very generous introduction. Very nice to be the one who connects dots. For those who are listening and watching us, I am Daniel, as Marcus said. Currently, I work as a corporate growth and coach trainer at Growth Tribe, a Dutch edtech that also works with corporates, scale-ups on how to help those companies into implementing new ways of working, growth, customer centricity, agile, and also data. As Marquis said, I'm originally from Brazil. I've been working here for 2 years and a half now, but before that, I have an entrepreneurial background. So basically, in the past 8 years, I've been working my own ventures, mostly related to education and also entrepreneurship. The last two business that I had before I actually joined Growth Tribe as a coach was a consultancy for small, medium-sized companies. So basically, I was helping Brazilian businesses on also how to adopt more agile ways of working, how to adopt growth, not only like in the terms of the processes, but also in the culture. And then I also had a business that was basically an app that connected entrepreneurs so they could help each other in their business challenges. So basically making sure that this knowledge that entrepreneurs have could actually be divided among themselves. So a peer-to-peer solution. This business was sponsored by the United Nations back there. In 2018, I decided to move to the Netherlands, and that's where I am now, coaching or keep like also training and coaching corporates, scale-ups, and all that buzz.
Awesome. Thanks for the introduction, Daniel. So today's episode is one, A, that I think about a lot, and B, that I'm actually just really excited to talk about, mainly because the content, which is sort of the mindsets, processes, systems that are required to really implement a growth program, that is the content. And this is, I think, most of what you do in your coaching of teams. But most, I think, significantly for me, my excitement comes from the fact that this is one of the areas that probably is least talked about in depth, and that in my experience, and I think you'll probably conclude or agree with the point, that it's perhaps the most important, or at least near the top of the list of important things that are required to really implement a growth program in a small business, medium-sized business, or in a corporate business setting. So for me, Daniel, I just A, want to thank you, and B, just make it clear that my personal opinion is that this is the most important part of the process. The hacks and the tactics are super important, but this is really where when you're trying to move at pace, the rubber meets the road. So I guess with that context, why don't you start by just giving us a bit of a sense, giving myself and the listeners a bit of a sense of where your work begins with the teams that you're coaching, and sort of what your day one with these teams generally looks like.
Yes, yeah, that's actually a very important observation because I think there is still like a myth that growth is just like about the hacks, it's just about like knowing the tools.
Yeah.
And I would say this is just like the tip of the iceberg, right? I would say that in
Mm.
order to build long-term growth, and here it doesn't really matter if you are like a big corporate or if you are like a startup or scale up. You need to build the foundations in terms of culture, in terms of processes, in terms of systems,
Sure.
right? Uh, it's very common that the first time that a team or a company wants to, let's say, look for our coaching or for our training, the first thing that they ask is, all right, so what is like the hack that is actually working right now? Because I want to adopt
Yeah.
this, because I want to increase conversions. And that's what I say, well, that's very beautiful, but hold your horses because this is, I would say, the last part, right? If you
Sure.
are actually if you are willing to implement long-term growth, a sustainable growth in your team, in your business unit, in your company, you need to start asking yourself, what are your behaviors? What is your culture in terms of business, right? So one of the first things that I do when I'm actually start to coach a new company or a new team is asking about the behaviors that they have as a team or the culture,
Mm.
right? And usually, what you see as an answer for those questions is that uh, they have the opposite culture, right? That is like the one that you would want in a growth, let's say, environment. So usually they're not super open or super, let's say, open to failures in general. And if you're talking about growth, if you're talking about experimentation, you need to be open to failures because they will happen, especially if you are working in a very uncertain environment. And that's the one that we're living right now. So,
Sure.
first thing I do is assess how open they are to expose themselves, to
Mm.
show themselves vulnerable to mistakes, to failures, and then start to build over this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's super interesting, and I want to make sure that we come back to sort of maybe towards the end of the show examples of these things that you're assessing for, like willingness or sort of ability to fail, and fail fast and fix fast, when it gets taken to almost too literal of an extreme where, people are like, oh, let's fail. I want to fail. Where's the failure? You know what I mean? But more on that later. I think, as a sort of a follow up to the question about what does the day one look like? What are you looking for? How do you, I'm sure there's sort of a set of criteria, failure, speed of decision making, how transversal does information get passed? How does information get passed internally in the organization? What systems do they have, etc. How do you sort of, I guess, approach assessing where they're at, and then what is generally your process once you have made this assessment of this is where company X is at in their sort of journey towards implementing a growth program?
Yeah, I think this varies a lot from company to company, right? But usually there are some, let's say, questions that I want to understand where like the team is at, right? So,
Sure.
how often are you collecting feedback, or how often are you talking to your customer in order to collect this feedback to promote any kind of change in your product or in your service, right? How many new ideas are you testing? In which kind of data are you basing like those decisions in order to move forward with these experiments, right?
Yeah.
Usually we say that we want to remove out of the decision making process what we call the hippos, right? Hippos, for those who don't know, the acronym is highest paid person opinion, right? And usually many of those teams, they have a lot of hippos that decide based on their experience, they decide based on their gut feeling, and then they leave the data aside, right? So yeah, it's trying to assess, first of all, how data driven they actually are, how customer centric they are into collecting this data, and how many experiments they are running, how many tests they are doing. And that is where also there is this connection with the failure that I mentioned before. So how many learnings you are getting out of the experiments, right? So to replicate it, to make sure that you are moving, following those aspects, those three aspects.
Yeah. Yeah. No, very interesting. I've found actually in some of my experiences that sometimes you encounter clients that you're supporting who are actually, without even knowing it, implementing or operating with sort of the growth mindset and with growth principles. And I know in some of our previous conversations, you've mentioned working with folks who come from a very scientific background to begin with, and so experimentation is nothing new. Where I think folks like this can still benefit from having experts like you in their mix is helping to systematize it, right? So, how do we take your natural penchant for operating using a hypothesis-driven approach, or operating using data, which you're already doing and you do it quite well? How do we take those sort of those givens and turn them into a system so that you operate in loops and cycles, and you understand how that sort of feeds back into your product or your service? So maybe give a little bit of context on how you've seen examples of people who are already kind of they've kind of got the rhythm, but need to sort of formalize it and systematize their approach.
Yeah, it's a good one. I would say that most of the business that I coach, they are at least data informed, right? So they take their decisions based somehow in some KPIs and some like data that they collect, but they don't actually have this established process into running experiments and learning from those experiments. I follow like a 5-step process in order to make sure that we make this process start. So first one is actually helping the team on how to start generating ideas, right? This can be based on their past experience, on customer data, or even like on data that they have on analytics or any kind of like tool. And of course, it's impossible to run an experiment to each of the ideas that they had, right? So that's where we come to the second part, which is basically ranking, prioritizing which are the top or the best ideas. They're the ones that are actually more likely to be successful. We outline experiments, we run those experiments, and I think the most, important part of the process that is most of the times overlooked is studying the data, right? We run the experiments. And then if it's a win, beautiful, everyone celebrates. And then there are more conversions. And then you probably go to a blog and then you share like a big win. But the reality is that when you start a growth program, an experimentation program to be like more exact, most of your experiments, there will be fails, right? There will be fails because you're testing things that you don't know about. At the end, you run experiments because you don't have the answer. If you already have the answer, you wouldn't like run experiments. But somehow people overlook this last part of the process, which is like studying the data and understanding why did you fail, right? So what happened over here that I didn't know and now I know, and how can I start applying this to other parts of the business, to other products as well? So usually the parts that we focus more on the process for companies or for teams that are somehow already data informed and are running some types of experiments is on how to better assess the information and the learnings that we got from the experiments themselves, right? Because this is a part where you can enrich your analysis, you can make sure that you are coming up with like new insights, new ideas to test new things,
Yes.
right?
Right.
So making sure that you are making sure that this continuous improvement will is actually going on and on and on, and doesn't stop
Yeah.
only once you run some experiments and then it's over. It's something that should be carried on over time.
Yeah. Oh, clear. So I want to bounce around a little bit to, instead of flowing in this sort of rigid order. One thing I know we've talked about in the past, and I know that I sometimes struggle with in talking with people about the work, is that there I think is this there can be a misconception that growth is a thing, right? That it's like growth means an increase in revenue. Growth means my product is viral. When in reality, growth can be multiple things at one time. Growth can be sort of something completely unrelated directly to money, right? So growth has many facets. What's your take on that sort of point or that idea? Would you agree with it? Disagree with it?
It's a good one. I'm also like the advocate that growth is not only like for marketing or for product teams. I think it's in general a culture that your company should adopt, right? Or even like you as an individual having this growth mindset culture or growth culture, as some people call, because I think growth encompasses other, I would say, terms, right? So it's also about new ways of working. It's about adding customer centricity to your analysis. And I think that nowadays customer centricity is one of the hottest topics out there, right?
Sure.
Making sure that you are actually delivering value to the clients that you're serving. Is also related to agile ways of working. So it's a whole new, I would say, frame that you and also the company should use to, I would say, do business, right? And I think like this new approach, this new growth frame, it's so, or at least is being so used and adopted by companies out there nowadays, because also of the environment that we are surrounded by, right? Perhaps like in the 80s, in the 90s, everything was predictable, or at least way more predictable in business than it is today, right? So in 2007, 2008, we got the first like iPhone, the first smartphone. And then what we're seeing now in terms of technology, improvements, new possibilities, it's crazy, right? Things are changing at a change rate. I usually say that is way higher in the last 15 years than it was in the past 5,000 years of like humankind. So it doesn't really make sense to keep like the same frame on how to do business that we used to have in the past to use the same frame like in this reality nowadays, right? It's kind of like you're using like the wrong glasses to see reality.
Sure.
So that's why so many companies are adopting this. I think it started as with tech companies, so Facebook, Alphabet, and many others. But now what you see is that this is spread out everywhere, right? If you go to banking, you see the most traditional banks doing this. If you're going to media, you see all of the media companies also adopting this new way of working. New York Times, Economist, The Guardian, they're all somehow doing this. Entertainment, you see Disney doing this, you see Lego. So it's everywhere. And it's not a coincidence. It's because they are more effective to perceive reality, or at least the reality that we have nowadays.
No, it's so much there in what you said, man. I mean, for me, some of the things that stood out are, sort of the environment in which we're working in is changing at a pace that has been, is historically unrivaled. we've got another thing that popped out for me. I'm sort of talking myself through where I'd like to focus next because there was just so much there. But another thing that came through is sort of the broad applicability of sort of this sort of new way of working and the shift that's happening and how we're working. Or how many people are working, I guess, or companies. Third point that came through and jumped out for me, and is actually perhaps I'd say tied for my first passion in this work, like where I feel sort of most at home, is the customer centricity, and really sort of deeply understanding your customer and sort of the jobs that they have to be done. So there's so much there, man. There's such a rich response on your part. I'm going to do something I've never done before. Are there any areas from what I just said, or really I'm just repeating what you said? Are there any areas that you'd like to sort of go deeper on in terms of your personal interest, or one that you feel like companies absolutely must get right, whether it's customer centricity or sort of being more adaptable in their mindsets, whatever? Is there anyone that you sort of feel most at home with?
Usually like one of like the main works I have when I'm actually start to coach like a new team, and I see like uh, the most difficult part tends to be the mindset change, right? Because I think this is the primary, I would say, thing that you need to start changing in terms of like adopting a more customer centric approach, and also adopting a more data driven approach. Because again,
Sure.
it's about the frame, right?
Sure.
And just like going back to your comment, when I'm talking about like adopting this growth frame, I'm not talking only about marketing and product teams. I'm talking about the whole company. I'm talking about
Yeah.
HR. I'm talking about ops. I'm talking about sales, right? All
Yeah.
of those concepts of customer centricity, agile, or anything you can adopt in your company, even if you're working like in a position that has an internal client, for instance. You mentioned jobs to
Yeah.
be done, right? Usually this is
Yeah.
a framework that is super known for marketing people. But if you're working in HR, if you're working in ops, like that's something that you can adopt to you, right?
Sure.
Because somehow we're also working to a client, even if it's like internal clients. So it's also about like this cultural change. It's about like this mindset change.
Yeah.
So usually I think like the most important part it's discussing on how to move from what we call a fixed mindset, or at least let's say the mindset that you currently have, to a growth mindset in which you're open to new things and you use the new frame to perceive reality. So it's a kind of
Yeah.
like a new mental model that you
Yeah.
use to
Yeah.
perceive reality around you. And it's very funny because every time I start talking about this in coaching tracks or even with other people, uh, this discussion over mindsets, people think it's very fluffy, right? It's something that, well, why are we discussing
Yeah. Yeah.
this?
Yeah. I know.
Why are we not discussing hard metrics? Why are we not discussing tools and
Yes.
hacks? And I said,
Yes.
yeah, we
Yes.
can discuss hacks. We can discuss the tools. It's beautiful, but to be
Yeah.
honest, this is very easy. I will show you like 100
Yeah.
tools. I will show you like 50 hacks, things that will be
Yeah.
like low hanging fruit for you. You're gonna be
Yeah.
amazed. But then I'm not doing like the long term transformation in your
That's
culture
right.
that needs to be done, right?
That's right.
And if you're talking about like changing mindset, if you're talking about adopting like a new frame or a new mental model to use in your life, uh, you're talking about changing behavior, right?
Yeah.
And changing behavior is very difficult, especially if you are in a
Sure.
company that you're working for, let's say 20, 15 years, and things are being done the same way all of the time. So
Yeah.
why should I bother to change, right? Why should
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
actually think about doing things different? Because everything
Yeah.
that I did so far made me arrive or reach where I am now. So how come this is, I would say, wrong, right? Wrong
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
which is not
Yeah.
actually wrong, but it's just like a different frame.
Yeah.
So The first, I would say, step is understanding how can we make sure that we start to change behavior by adopting like this new mindset, the growth
Yeah.
mindset.
Yeah. No, that's incredible, and I couldn't agree more. Awesome. Yeah, so much there. I mean, I think the fact that at the end of the day, this is kind of like a mindset shift is one of the reasons why a mindset shift that is, that leads to a behavior change, I think is one of the ways that I'd sort of connect it. When I speak with clients, or sometimes people who are just curious about the work, and they often, I mean, so to the point that you brought up about, people thinking that this is fluffy stuff and that we're some like sort of tree huggers. We're like, I thought you were hardcore marketers or a hardcore growth agency. And, you're talking about mindsets, and and I try and sort of give an analogy. There's sort of two that I sometimes use to try and make the point. One is this sort of example of a right turn in a car, or a left turn, a turn in a car versus a turn in an airplane, right? Like and this is a bit weird that I've flown an airplane before, but to fly a plane is just to turn a steering wheel. It's sort of like you're turning on one dimension, right? But to do that in an airplane, you're turning on two dimensions at the same time, and making a very different right turn. You're essentially doing the exact same thing, but the mental effort that's required to sort of understand, what it actually means to change a shift of mindset. I think that example sort of makes it, at least it's food for thought, or maybe just confusion. The other one that comes to mind, just in terms of one of the shifts, the leaps that people need to make when trying to establish or adopt a growth program, or a culture of growth, is, I give the example of sort of how much of what we do and much of how we have to think about the processes that we're carrying out are sort of almost diametrically opposed to how we've been brought up, right? And so there's two examples. One is, imagine your mother or your father telling you to, like, don't worry about getting from first grade to 12th grade. Like, just make sure you do good, over the next 2 weeks, right? And then let's assess things, right? Nobody's parents said that to them, right? Or imagine sort of building a house, right? Like it's very easy to think of like, it's going to have 30 rooms and this is going to be, the trim and all the details. And it's like, dude, just get the door set up, just get the frame set up. And then let's assess where things are at there, at that point. And I think, we're so primed to think things through fully, right? Like, not in terms of the thoroughness of the process, but in terms of the completeness of the outcome that we think we're aiming for, right? So, my background was in sort of product development, looking over the strategy and the strategic direction around what are we building, and for whom are we solving problems for. And I haven't met a client yet who couldn't tell me, what this product is going to look like in, year 7, when you've got, 16 billion followers or 16 billion users, and this thing, is as popular as Facebook, or maybe as Facebook was. Everybody can think through, but it's much more difficult, strangely enough, to sort of think it through just enough. And then sort of begin sort of experimenting and analyzing the results, and then building after you generate some ideas. So anyway, it's just I think that's a long way of saying that your point resonated, and it's something that I think it's just a total mind shift in terms of how you think about the world and sort of things moving in it.
Yeah, if I can add on this, like, that's exactly what you said. We are not brought up with this kind of like mindset, right? It's not something that is only like related to business. but it's related to parenting. It's relating to how you handle your relationships. It's how you perceive the development of a new skill. So very likely, if you were an adolescent or you know someone who already went through this, you failed your math test when you're like 12 years old, and then you said to yourself that, well, I am not good at math and I'll never be good at math again. So you block yourself, right? So you are afraid to try again. You're afraid to fail because, again, we are raised with this concept that, you need to get the good grades. You can fail. You need to go through your tests and make sure that you go into university and everything is going well, right?
Yeah.
And actually, like this research on mindset, it was made by Carol Dweck, like her famous book, like Mindset. So basically, that's where like she realized that people who adopt this growth mindset, as she called, they were able to be open to new things, to try new things, or comfortable with failures, as long as they were able to understand what were the learnings out of those failures, and also think about an action plan to improve yourself, right? And this is a very, let's say, useful mental model or a very useful frame because actually this is a frame that helps you be better, right? Having a fixed mindset, you will always be the guy who will be afraid of trying new things, right? Because you want to avoid frustration somehow, right? Or you want to save face. And of course, this is spread out, I would say, throughout our Western culture in that sense. Some countries more than others, but making sure that you're consciously adopting this growth mindset is one of perhaps the best kept secrets in growth that no one is talking about, right? Because if you think about the tools, if you think about the processes, they are kind of like the skeleton. But the growth mindset is, and even like the psychological safety in your teams, they are the muscles, they are the soul of a true like growth program, a long-term like growth program implementation. And it's very funny because now you're saying I'm just like thinking about like a lot of examples that happened with me, and one that's like repeated itself a few times with different teams from pharma, retail, from media as well that I'm coaching is after a while we ask them like, so how are the experiments going? Were they like wins? Were they fails? And they said, no, it's going super well. We're running like 2-3 experiments and they're all wins. Then, okay, let me see your wins. So this one here, it didn't work well. So we didn't achieve, let's say, the object that we're looking for, but it's a win. And I said, how? And then like they say, no, it's a win because it didn't work, but we got so many learnings. And now we know that it doesn't work. So in those small examples, like you see that there is the mindset's not there yet. So they understand the process, they understand the hard structure, but they don't get like, the soul, if you believe in soul. They don't have like the spirit, right? It's okay to say you failed, right? And most of the experiments will be failed because if we ran an experiment, it's because we didn't know the answer. So you see like top management also having this approach. And again, that's one of the reasons that like I always try to start with like this behavioral change on mindsets. And it's very uncomfortable when you meet like a team that is used to work in this very traditional way where you can't like expose yourself to failure, to asking questions, especially like in a corporate environment, right? But it's needed, right? It's usually, I like to make a comparison with when you start a diet. Usually the first 14 to 21 days are the most difficult ones because you can see the results. You are adopting new behaviors that you are not used to, and this is very uncomfortable. So usually I like to say, trust the process. I'll hold your hand for now. We'll do this together. Do your first experiment, and then you see how it actually looks like. And that's how actually it builds up into rolling this out after a while. And the adoption of this mindset, it's also about hitting walls, getting frustrated with like mistakes, getting frustrated with internal blockers that most of those corporates have, right?
Yeah.
But this also builds the resilience, right?
Yeah.
You have two options once you hit a wall. You can have the fixed mindset and say, well, I will stop doing that. Or you can adopt the growth mindset and say, well, how can I think laterally on how to solve the solution? And that's where we have like a lot of what we call aha moments in those teams. When they see and they perceive that they are able to actually move the needle in a different way, that's where they say, wow, now I understood what you said about like having the growth mindset. And most of the times we're not even aware, right? We're not aware. It's a given and we're not there.
No, it's
but yeah, it's very funny.
No, it's good. You actually sort of beat me to the punch in terms of coming back to the sometimes too literal interpretation of what we suggested. So we're going to need to wrap up, but I want to pose one question to you, which I've never asked to any of the guests that we've interviewed, but I think because there is, I think this very crucial aspect of growth that doesn't really get addressed enough, I think, in depth. I want to ask you for your opinion on when you hear the term growth orchestration, which is sort of like it's our rallying cry. We're not just sort of performance folks. We orchestrate growth because it is a process, and our objective is to sort of begin to work in these cycles and have each sort of revolution around the cycle, revolution through the cycle, go faster, be more efficient, learn more, start running more experiments, etc. So I'm interested to hear, like, how would you riff on this sort of term or this phrase or notion of growth orchestration, or growth being orchestration, orchestrated?
I think this is a very on point term, right? Because as we're discussing, like in the last minutes, growth is not only a single event. It's not like a single hack or a single adoption of a tool. It's a whole movement, a whole cultural movement that needs to be pursued by the company, right? So it's something that you need to move different parts of the business at the same time, perhaps at different speeds as well. But you need to know, let's say, if you're a manager, if you're like a leader or C-level in your company and you want to promote this growth change, make sure that it's not going to be only one team start to adopt new tools and hacks. It's going to be about understanding how are you going to make this change happen at different pace, at different moments of development, right? Inside the company. And making sure that you're able to orchestrate all of this change, because there will be teams that will be more advanced into adopting, let's say, new ways of working, into being customer centric. There will be other teams that will be very reluctant. So you as a manager, you as a leader, you need to orchestrate growth, right? And again, it's not only about adoption of tools, it's about a completely different worldview or frame that you need to make sure that you need to adopt, that your team needs to adopt, and at the end, the whole company, right? But this also relates to change management a lot too. But I think it's like another discussion.
No, and I hope that you'd accept another invite at some point, because I do. I mean, as I mentioned, this is a personal sort of I think the work that you're leading, and I think the perspectives you have are very much aligned with the things that I spend a lot of my time in the company focusing on. So I'd love to have you back on the show for us to go deeper, maybe in mindset and tactics or I think basically just exploring something in depth to sort of almost do a process tear down and rebuild in terms of how and what you can do to sort of help begin assessing and shaping and promoting mindset shifts, if that's the topic that we choose to go in on. But bottom line is, I'd love to have you back on the show, Daniel. It's been great. Always appreciate your perspectives and your thoughts on growth broadly, but certainly on sort of this overlooked side of growth, because I think it's honestly where it's really at. So, Daniel, thank you so much, and hope to have you back again very soon, my friend.
Great. Very nice to be here as well. And yeah, let's talk. Let's keep this going. Nice.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel.